Every great revolution has its defining moments, those turning points that elevate it from a mere uprising to a chapter carved into the pages of history. These are not just events, but symbols that echo through the collective memory of nations. Mustafa Kemal's arrival in Samsun aboard the Bandarma ferry, Gandhi's defiance of British monopoly by picking up a handful of salt from the shores of the Salt March, the storming of the Bastille, or the revolutionaries who faced firing squads with unshaken resolve. Each of these moments rewrote the destiny of a nation or an idea. For the Cuban Revolution, that pivotal moment came 67 years ago when Fidel Castro and 82 comrades set sail from Mexico aboard a small boat named Granma. Battling the Caribbean Sea, they landed on Cuban shores, and in doing so, set in motion a movement that would change the island's fate forever. When they set out, they were only 82. Under the leadership of Fidel Castro and Ernesto Che Guevara, they had spent a year in Mexico undergoing guerrilla training with strict military discipline. Their mission was clear: to overthrow the dictator Batista, who had ruled Cuba with bloodshed and corruption for years in service of US interests, and to ignite a revolution that would restore dignity to the Cuban people. Whether seen today as a source of inspiration or a subject of controversy, this uprising by a small Caribbean nation in 1959 became one of the defining actions that altered the course of world history. In the 1930s, Cuba had become more than just a trade partner for the United States. It had turned into a free zone for gambling, prostitution, and organized crime. The American mafia controlled the streets of Havana, and while the local people struggled with hunger, money flowed through luxury hotels and brothels across the island. Amid this decaying system, a young law student named Fidel Castro was beginning to encounter increasingly radical ideas. Born on August 13, 1926 in eastern Cuba, Fidel had received a Catholic education and began studying law at the University of Havana in 1945. The country was in political turmoil, and the streets were boiling with unrest. In 1952, Fidel Castro became a parliamentary candidate for the Orthodox Party. However, before the elections could take place, Batista seized power through a coup, dissolved political parties, suspended constitutional rights, and attempted to silence the universities. In opposition to this illegitimate regime, Fidel, alongside his brother Raúl and the close allies, founded an underground movement called the 26th of July Movement, Movimiento 26 de Julio. Their first major act came in 1953 with an armed assault on the Moncada barracks, but the attack failed. Many revolutionaries were killed, and both Fidel and Raúl were captured. Abel Santamaria, Castro's right-hand man and second in command, was killed during the assault. Had he survived, he might have taken the place that would later be held by Che Guevara. During his trial, Fidel delivered a powerful 4-hour defense speech and etched his words into history with the phrase, "History will absolve me." After spending 2 years in prison, he was released through an amnesty and went into exile in Mexico. As he left, he addressed his people saying, "We will return to bring our nation a life of dignity and freedom without hunger or oppression." In Mexico, he met an Argentine doctor, Che Guevara. Che was a revolutionary who had traveled across South America by motorcycle and had deeply witnessed the injustices across the continent. Together, they agreed to return to Cuba and launch a guerrilla war against Batista. But there was a major problem. How would they return? On Raul Castro's suggestion, they needed to acquire a boat. They didn't have enough money. With the help of Mexican revolutionaries, they managed to purchase an American torpedo boat. However, legal issues arose with the large vessel, and Mexican authorities refused to allow its departure. The plan had collapsed. Then, one morning when all hope seemed lost, Fidel spotted an old yacht called Granma during a walk along the riverbank. It was a 13-meter-long 1943 model, weathered and worn. Its capacity was only 12 people, but the revolutionaries boarded it with 82 men. On the morning of November 25th, 1956, the Granma set sail. Loaded with weapons, ammunition, food, and fuel, the boat moved slowly. The journey, originally planned to take 5 days, lasted 7. By the time they reached Cuba, they were nearly out of fuel. To make matters worse, they had landed a mile off their intended destination. Their arrival had been timed to coincide with the civilian uprising planned for November 30th in Havana. But due to the delay, the revolt began early and was crushed before Castro's forces could arrive. To add to the chaos, one of the guerrillas fell into the sea as they reached the shore. Fidel declared, "We will not move forward until we find him." This stance further solidified his leadership among his comrades. The setbacks didn't end in the early days. Cuban security forces had detected the Granma's landing. They launched attacks with planes and machine guns. For the ill-equipped, exhausted, and outnumbered guerrillas, this assault was devastating. Che was shot in the neck, but the bullet wasn't fatal. He stood up, grabbed his weapon, and kept moving. The guerrilla fighters were scattered. Those who survived took refuge in the mountains. Their numbers had dropped to just 12. Fidel declared, "Comrades, the real fight begins now." In the Sierra Maestra Mountains, with support from the local people, they reorganized the struggle. It was from this point on that the legend of Comandante Che began. The guerrillas united with surrounding peasants. Women joined the resistance. Even a women's battalion was formed. Rather than silencing the population, Batista's brutal repression only fueled their anger. It is estimated that around 20,000 people were killed by Batista's regime during this period. From 1958 onward, the revolutionaries established their own radio network. The guerrillas in the mountains had now grown strong enough to confront government forces in open combat. On December 27, 1958, forces under Che Guevara's command overran the military garrison in Santa Clara. They seized an armored train loaded with weapons and ammunition. This victory marked the downfall of Batista. On January 1st, 1959, the dictator fled to the Dominican Republic and later to Franco's fascist Spain, taking with him $300 million and 180 men. On January 2nd, Fidel and his comrades entered Havana on the shoulders of a jubilant crowd. Upon coming to power, Fidel immediately called for unity among Latin American countries. The American public initially welcomed him with great interest. However, this wave of admiration unsettled U.S. President John F. Kennedy. In the bipolar climate of the Cold War, Cuba's independent stance was perceived as a threat in Washington. In 1960, the United States imposed an embargo. Literacy campaigns were launched through education reform. In 1961, the CIA-backed Bay of Pigs invasion was defeated within just 3 days. Shortly after, Fidel declared the socialist nature of the revolution. We are at America's doorstep, and we have made a socialist revolution. Following this statement, ties with the Soviet Union deepened, and the United States severed all diplomatic relations. The Cuban Revolution became a source of inspiration for liberation movements from Angola to Mozambique. Che Guevara served briefly in the government, but later renounced all official roles, setting off first to Africa and then to Bolivia, where he would ultimately die for the revolution. Fidel Castro survived dozens of CIA assassination attempts. When he passed away at the age of 90, millions bid him farewell into eternity. Today, whether viewed with admiration or criticism, the Cuban Revolution has not lost its impact. The yacht Granma is now on display at the Museum of the Revolution in Havana, and the official newspaper of the Communist Party of Cuba is named after it. This small boat continues to symbolize the great march of a people,